Before we begin today's episode, just a reminder to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you enjoy this episode. "18-year-old Anita Knutson had recently finished her freshman year at Minot State University. The elementary education major returned to her apartment on the evening of June 1st, 2007, and was not heard from over the weekend. After multiple unanswered calls, Anita's father visited her apartment 3 days later and made a grisly discovery. Anita had been stabbed to death, and her killer left the knife behind. However, further investigation began to call the scene into question, wondering if perhaps certain details had been staged. A cast of potential suspects was examined, some of which included Anita's roommate, who Anita expressed fear of, a friend who held an unrequited crush, and the maintenance man who had a key, among others. Despite being in possession of critical evidence including fingerprints and DNA, police have never been able to officially name a single suspect, leading many to wonder if perhaps the crime was random. More than 13 years later, and there are far more questions than answers. Has Anita's killer moved out, perhaps to kill again, or does the truth still reside somewhere in the city of Minot? This is Trace Evidence, episode 137, The Murder of Anita Knutson. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine the murder of Anita Knutson, a case as tragic as it is confusing and frustrating. Before getting into the case, just a few notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow the show on social media on Twitter at TraceEvPod, Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. The show is also available on MeWe and Minds. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merch, there's a Patreon available at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donation options, and contact information. You can submit case suggestions directly through the website or email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. Anita Knutson had lived a vibrant, positive, and focused life, and it was only just beginning. Tragically, an unknown assailant would end all of her dreams, stealing all of her possibilities, and now, more than 13 years later, the state of the case and those connected to it is as frustrating and confusing as it's ever been. This is episode 137, The Murder of Anita Knutson. It was a quiet afternoon on Monday, June 4th, 2007, when Gordon Knutson began making the one-hour drive to Minot, North Dakota, where his 18-year-old adopted daughter Anita was living. Anita had always been in close contact with the family, including 2 adopted siblings, but over the course of that weekend, multiple unanswered calls from her mother, Sharon, had raised some concerns. Unsure of what was causing the lapse in communication, Sharon asked Gordon to drive out and check on their daughter. Arriving at the apartment building Anita shared with a roommate, Gordon found Anita's car in the parking lot, but several knocks on her door went without response. No sounds could be heard from inside the building, and so, growing more concerned, Gordon approached the building manager to request access to the apartment. At first, the manager didn't want to unlock the door, explaining to Gordon that she could get in trouble for letting someone in without permission. As this conversation was taking place, the maintenance man who worked for the building and was also dating the manager approached Gordon and explained that he had found something strange. The screen from Anita's bedroom window had been knocked out and was lying on the ground. A slash mark, apparently made with a knife, was clearly visible through the screen. Angry and frightened, Gordon approached his daughter's window and peered inside. There, Gordon saw Anita lying in bed, partially covered by a robe. The mattress was soaked in blood. This was enough for the manager to produce a key, and Gordon entered, rushing into the bedroom. Reaching out, fearful and emotional, Gordon felt Anita's skin was cold. Gordon reeled back, trying to come to terms with what he was seeing, while also realizing that he would have to make the horrible phone call back to Sharon to tell her that their daughter was dead. Neither Gordon nor anyone else in the family knew how to handle this situation, and while their immediate thoughts went to Anita, they also began wondering who could have done something so horrible. They never imagined that 13 years later, they would still be seeking that answer, and the answers to many more questions which have arisen in those ensuing years. Anita Mae Knutson was born on September 22, 1988 in Orange, California. Gordon and Sharon Knutson had several of their own children, but as they got older and the children moved out to start their lives, they decided to adopt. Anita was the first child they adopted, finalized when she was 5 months old. Over the course of the next few years, they would adopt 2 more children, Daniel and Anna. At the time, the Knutson family was living in the Anaheim area. However, in June of 2002, they picked up stakes and moved out to Butte, North Dakota. Anita has been described as an extremely positive, fun-loving, and caring person. From an early age, she was all smiles, and many people have been quoted commenting on her bright, optimistic outlook and demeanor. Marilyn Ann Hagen, the mother of one of Anita's friends, explained, quote, "She had that megawatt smile, and she brightened others' lives with it." End quote. In addition to Anita's kindness and cheerful disposition, she was also a defender of what was right, often putting herself on the line to stand up for others. In an interview with Crime Watch Daily, Gordon explained that if someone was being picked on, Anita would be the first to stand beside them. One anecdote which seems to encapsulate some of Anita's fighting spirit originates during her time at Velva High School, from which she would graduate in 2006. Anita was admonished by the school principal for violating the dress code, but she didn't accept it. Instead, she read over the rules and went through the code, noting that she had not, in fact, violated it. According to her father, for weeks after that, Anita would pop her head into the principal's office, reminding him that he owed her an apology. Eventually, she would get her apology and then beam her charismatic smile. Throughout her high school life, Anita was extremely active, being involved with the FCCLA, Relay for Life, soccer, violin, piano, and serving as a member of the homecoming court, according to the Bismarck Tribune. Iris Swedland, school librarian, added about Anita, quote, "When she was in our building, she was very active. She was smiley and happy and colorful. She was a spark, and if you had a bad day and you saw Anita, she always made your day. I don't think I ever saw her down." End quote. Anita's siblings have commented many times about how loving and caring she was, and how close they all were. Anna and Daniel were closest to Anita, having grown up in the house around her and having been extremely outspoken about what a positive influence and loving sister she was. Following her 2006 high school graduation with honors, Anita was accepted into Minot State University, located approximately 60 miles to the northwest of Butte. Anita moved out in the fall of 2006. Very much wanting to support herself and to attend school, the 18-year-old ultimately found an off-campus apartment in northwest Minot, which she would share with a roommate. The apartment, located on 4th Street, was just a mile from campus. She also picked up 2 jobs, one at a local hotel, the Fairfield Inn, the other at a retail store in the mall, to help support herself while she attended school, putting herself on the track to pursue a career in elementary education. Despite the distance, an hour's drive away, Anita maintained close contact with both her parents and siblings. According to Sharon, she spoke to Anita almost every day, and it was extremely rare for a call to go unanswered, and when they did, Anita was always quick to call back. Outside of school, Anita was very popular, drawing in a large circle of friends. One particular friend, Tyler Schmaltz, attended high school with Anita and accompanied her to the senior prom. While Tyler has stated that Anita was his best friend, he also acknowledged that he had a crush on her, which she did not return. Despite this, Tyler ended up living in an apartment with his brother in the same building in which Anita lived, while also going on to attend Minot State University. Several people have described Tyler as a polite person who clearly had an interest in Anita, but who Anita only viewed as a friend. When asked about his connection to Anita, Tyler would later explain that while she was very popular and made friends easily, he didn't. And while many of the friends he had made moved away to go to school, Anita became the closest friend he had, perhaps the only friend he had. Gordon would explain to Crime Watch Daily that Anita had previously mentioned Tyler had been persistent in asking her out, but that she simply wasn't interested. Regardless of Tyler's obvious interest and Anita's apparent lack thereof, she did still communicate with him on a friendly basis. Anita was known to love dancing and frequented a downtown Minot club on weekends when she was free. There, she was often dancing with groups of friends and, according to those who had been around, often rebuffing the approaches of men who wanted to take her out. While school and work seemed to be going well, according to Anita's parents, she began having trouble at home. Supposedly, the roommate with whom she shared her apartment had done several things that had upset her. Sharon later explained that her roommate, a young woman, frequently invited men over to the apartment and would oftentimes leave the building without seeing them out, meaning that Anita would find herself waking up or walking into an apartment to be confronted by an unknown man already lingering inside. Several sources report that the relationship between the roommates began to deteriorate, breaking down into shouting matches, and that, in at least one instance, Anita had her foot slammed in a door. Anyone who's ever had a roommate knows it isn't exactly uncommon to get on one another's nerves, but this situation seemed to be becoming more volatile and even threatening. According to the family, Anita expressed concern and even fear about her roommate, who she alleged had been sending her threatening text messages. The messages themselves were apparently never seen, at least not by anyone other than Anita, but it was enough for her mother Sharon to acknowledge that Anita may have been in fear for her life. Curiously, though, in the weeks preceding Anita's murder, several friends and family members reported that whatever issues had existed between the two roommates had cooled down, and they had ultimately come to terms with one another, mending their relationship and ending the tense atmosphere. While the timeline revolving around the weekend of the murder has several gaps in it and several unanswered questions, for the most part, investigators believe they have a pretty good idea of where Anita was and who she may have spent time with. On Friday, June 1st, Anita spoke to her mother on the phone in the evening. In an interview with the Bismarck Tribune, Sharon explained that when she spoke to her daughter, the 18-year-old was at a friend's house. During the phone call, Anita said that she would be heading home shortly. Later examination found that Anita arrived back at her apartment, parked her car, and dropped her rent check in the building's deposit box. Following her entrance, there doesn't appear to be any evidence to suggest that Anita left her apartment again, meaning that after arriving home on Friday, she was home up until the moment she was killed. That same weekend, Anita's father, sister Anna, and brother Daniel attended the North Dakota State baseball tournament in which Daniel was playing, according to an NBC News interview with Anna. Anna noted that the family was aware that throughout the weekend no one had heard from Anita, and it was considered strange, especially since Sharon had placed several calls which had gone unanswered and unreturned. While they were not aware of it at the time, Anita had also failed to show up for work at the Fairfield Inn that particular Saturday, which was very much out of character for her, especially without placing a call to explain her absence. Anita, who had been noted as being both reliable and punctual, was not in the habit of skipping work without notifying them first. That same day, Sharon called several times but got no answer. When Sunday, June 3rd came around and no one had heard from Anita still, Sharon placed more phone calls. None of these calls were answered, nor did Anita call back. Being that Anita had never gone multiple days without so much as a response before, Sharon's concern was turning to worry, and she asked Gordon to take a ride out to Minot to check on Anita, and he agreed to head out the next day, Monday, June 4th. At the time, while the family was worried, no one could have imagined what horrors Gordon would discover upon his arrival. According to Gordon, he arrived in the late afternoon. Anita's car was parked in front of the building, not far from the entrance to her apartment, but his knocks on the door went unanswered. Frustrated, Gordon approached the apartment manager wanting to be allowed inside. A back and forth developed during that time where the manager explained that technically she wasn't supposed to let anyone in, though Gordon pressed the issue explaining how worried he was about his daughter. It was around this time that the apartment manager's boyfriend, who also worked as the maintenance man for the building, approached Gordon and explained that he had found something strange. That morning, he noted that the screen to Anita's bedroom window was knocked to the ground. Further examination showed that a knife or some other instrument had been used to cut a long horizontal slash into the screen. Immediately, the concern of a robbery or something worse came to mind, and it was at this point that Gordon went to the window looking inside. There, partially covered by a robe, he saw his daughter. She wasn't moving, and there was blood soaking into her mattress. Finally, getting inside, Gordon rushed into the room. He found a grisly scene. Anita was lying face down on her bed, partially covered. Blood had soaked into the mattress and began pooling on the floor. When Gordon reached out to check her, she was cold to the touch. It was clear that she was dead, and likely had been so for at least a few hours. Gordon's 911 call came into the Minot Police Department operator at 5:12 p.m. Within minutes, multiple units had been dispatched to the 4th Street apartment. While investigators were taping off the scene and beginning preliminary examination, Gordon had to make the difficult phone call to Sharon, who was absolutely devastated. Anna, who was 15 at the time, later detailed to NBC how she had come to learn the terrible truth, saying, quote, "When I got the call, I was at a friend's house. My dad called and said that my brother was going to come and pick me up and that I wasn't to ask any questions." End quote. According to Anna, when she saw her brother Daniel, she knew something was horribly wrong because he was crying and she'd never seen him crying before. It was at that time that Daniel told her, and for Anna, it was surreal, almost impossible to accept that her beloved sister was gone. Inside the apartment, police found a somewhat confusing scene. It was clear that Anita had been stabbed to death, but the motive behind it wasn't so readily ascertainable. At first, the cut and knocked out screen led police to believe that they could be looking at a robbery gone wrong, but examination of the scene and items found indicated that nothing was missing. Was it possible that the killer had meant to rob the apartment, assuming no one was home, and killed Anita reflexively before fleeing? That much was unsure, but one thing was. Whatever had taken place in the apartment didn't leave any signs behind. While investigators knew Anita had been stabbed, they didn't find any evidence to show that any struggle or fighting had taken place inside the apartment. There didn't appear to be any defensive wounds, and outside of Anita and her bed, nothing in the apartment had been disturbed. Curiously, while police couldn't note anything which was missing from the apartment, they did recover one item which didn't belong there: the murder weapon. A knife was recovered in the sink, described by investigators as both dirty and bloody. It seemed apparent that they had found the weapon the killer had used, and this would later be confirmed during the autopsy. It was strange, though, that the killer had left the knife behind, since they were able to determine the knife didn't belong to Anita or her roommate, meaning the suspect had gone through the trouble of bringing it with them. The knife itself was described in several different ways, though investigators have never revealed photos of it nor given a complete description. Throughout multiple articles and interviews, the knife has been said to have been a pocket knife, though specifically what kind has never been explained. To this day, there's no clarifying information as to whether they are referring to a Swiss Army-style knife with a 3 to 4 inch blade that tends to be skinny and unserrated, or perhaps a folding knife with a broader, possibly serrated blade. A subsequent autopsy would confirm several details for investigators. According to the results, which have never been fully released, Anita sustained 2 stabs to her chest, only one of which has been described as lethal. Further examination concluded that Anita had not been sexually assaulted, nor had she been physically beaten or assaulted in addition to the stab wounds. Toxicology showed there were no drugs or alcohol in her system. Ultimately, Anita's time of death could not be definitively proven, though investigators have stated their belief that the murder took place during the early morning hours of Sunday, June 3rd. For many, this raised several questions, namely, why did Anita not answer calls on Saturday or show up to work if she wasn't killed until Sunday? However, it has been specified that while evidence suggests the murder happened on Sunday, they can't prove that beyond doubt. This has led some to presume that Anita may have been held hostage or perhaps was in the company of her killer that Saturday. Quite frankly, investigators have been incredibly tight-lipped and have revealed few details about the case or their theories surrounding it. Other details revealed by investigators have raised several questions, primarily in relation to how the killer gained entry to the apartment. Obviously, when Gordon arrived, the door was locked, and it was presumed the killer had gained entry through the window, cutting the screen. However, examination of the screen showed two anomalies. Firstly, some of Anita's blood was found along the cut in the screen, indicating that it was cut after the murder had taken place. Because of this, it was further believed that the screen had likely been cut from the inside and then knocked out of the window. It has since been speculated that this was done for one of two reasons. Either the killer was still in the apartment for a period of time after the murder and used the window to exit, or perhaps the killer had staged the scene to appear as though a break-in had occurred to cover up the true motive. I should note, at least one article says a neighbor reported seeing broken glass outside of Anita's window that Monday morning, though I've not been able to find any additional references to this in any other statements. From early on, police have theorized that the killer likely knew Anita. According to all information I've been able to obtain, the lock for her apartment door was a twist and pull type, meaning that the killer could have exited through the front door simply turning the lock before closing the door behind them. Because of this, police were very interested in anyone who had access to a key. This was ultimately determined to have only been Anita, her roommate, and the apartment complex itself. It was noted, though, that since he worked for the complex, the maintenance man would also have had access. This detail, in conjunction with the fact that he had been the one to discover the cut screen, led many to begin looking at him as a possible person of interest. However, in the early days, police would have no shortage of people to look at. Outside of the maintenance man himself, police were drawn to Tyler Schmaltz, the man who had an interest in Anita and lived in the same building. They didn't have to go far, finding him standing outside of the police tape lines the day Anita's body was found. According to Tyler, police escorted him to a van nearby and questioned him that evening. It has since been reported that police felt somewhat suspicious, as when they asked Tyler when he had last spoken to Anita, he was able to give them an exact time, down to the minute. Tyler, however, brushed this aside, explaining that he had encountered Anita's aunt at the scene of the crime, and she had asked him when he had last spoken to Anita, so he had returned to his apartment and checked his computer to verify the exact time. According to Tyler, he didn't feel he was being questioned as a potential suspect, nor did he get the impression that police were looking at him with suspicion. This, though, would not be the last time police speak to Tyler. For his part, when asked about Tyler, Gordon expressed that he found it strange that Tyler wasn't crying at the scene, and while no further description was given, he did state that he believed Tyler's behavior was odd. Another person police were eager to question was Anita's roommate. Reportedly, the roommate, who has never been named publicly, was not at the apartment that weekend. When asked for her whereabouts, she explained that she was on the other side of town, staying with her parents, who confirmed her alibi. While the exact details of the police interview are unknown, we do know that authorities did request and were granted a DNA sample. Details later emerged with police explaining that they had recovered not only unidentified fingerprints at the scene, but also what they believed to be the killer's DNA, and they were looking to get samples for comparison. The exact details of how they obtained the DNA, in what form or quantity, have never been shared, and later, DNA will become a major source of contention for many connected to this case. Given the information that Anita and her roommate had a complicated relationship, many people have been eager to point an accusatory finger, despite the fact that no solid evidence has ever been provided. Perhaps this is complicated in part due to the actions of the roommate's mother. Reportedly, during Anita's funeral, the mother showed up and got involved in a verbal altercation with Sharon, angry about the fact that police had questioned her daughter. Questioning the roommate is a fairly basic part of any investigation, especially when you mix in reports of threats and fights. Why exactly her mother reacted in this way, we may never know, but no one in the media has ever been able to obtain an interview or even a statement from the roommate or her family. Many have since argued that being alibied by her parents doesn't exactly make them feel that it's airtight, but police have been silent on the issue. Investigators eventually learned that in weeks prior to the murder, construction work had been occurring at a building across the street from the apartment as well as at the apartment itself. The construction company working across the street was from out of state. The workers at Anita's building were fixing the roof. Around the time of Anita's murder, as many as 40 different employees had been in the area between the two groups. Police managed to track down and speak with many of the workers from the out-of-state company, a majority of who submitted DNA samples, though the implication seems to be that some did not. Unfortunately, police have never been able to confirm whether or not they spoke with everyone who had been working at the apartment, as they had been utilizing day laborers, and police did not have enough information to identify and track down some of them. While canvassing during their initial investigation, police spoke with one witness who reported seeing a man fleeing from the area of the apartments. According to the Bismarck Tribune, a female witness saw a man running north on 4th Street Sunday morning. The witness was able to provide investigators with a thorough enough description that they created and released a composite sketch. Not long after the sketch was released, police were contacted by a man who claimed to be the runner. According to investigators, they interviewed the man and did not believe he had been involved in the murder. Lieutenant Jason Sundbakken later stated, quote, "We found the guy who it probably was, somebody who ran in the area from time to time. We're fairly certain we've ruled him out." End quote. In addition to looking at people in the apartment building and surrounding areas, police also went to clubs they knew Anita had frequented in the downtown area in hopes of finding some of the people who had interacted with her. Reportedly, police spoke to a number of individuals but never came across anyone who it was believed would have been involved in the murder. This opened the door to speculation that it was possible the assailant may have been someone random, and that maybe the crime itself was not personally motivated. Police, though, while still mostly quiet about their theories, have remained somewhat steadfast in their belief that the killer likely had a personal connection to Anita, even if only so much as having known her and interacted with her at some point in time. While never giving out specific names, police in several interviews noted that they were working on multiple potential people of interest. On Monday, June 11th, 1 week after Anita was found, a funeral service was held in Velva. The church in which the service took place wasn't large enough to accommodate all of the attendees, and so a secondary location was set up in the high school gym where visitors were able to watch the service on monitors, according to the Bismarck Tribune. There was a massive outpouring of emotion, and the large turnout spoke volumes about the people who had been touched by Anita and felt crushed by her murder. Anita was laid to rest in Butte, but for her family and investigators, the nightmare was only just beginning. While police had examined multiple avenues in the early part of the investigation, they slowly found themselves running out of places to go as their pool of potential suspects was shrinking. In July, a month after the murder, Lieutenant Dan Strandberg spoke with reporters about progress on the case. Strandberg argued that the case was still very active, explaining, quote, "It seems like we're constantly interviewing people. We have some suspects, but no one particular individual we can focus on." End quote. For the family and community as a whole, the need for justice and closure was growing. Over time, faith in the investigation would begin to fade and people started to speak out against it, in some cases feeling that the Minot police simply weren't equipped to handle it, in other cases, outright arguing that they had bungled the investigation from the start. Approximately a month after Anita was killed, a female student was attacked on campus by an unknown male. Reportedly, the attacker was scared off by a passing vehicle, but this, in conjunction with Anita's murder, began to make people wonder if there could be a connection. Police, though, felt they had no evidence to link the crimes. Tyler would go on to create a Facebook page dedicated to Anita, as well as a YouTube tribute video series. Some viewed his actions as suspicious, as he seemed overly involved in the case, but Tyler argued he simply wanted to help solve the murder of his dear friend. Tyler has, on several occasions, passed on tips to police that he received online. The Knutson family, for their part, have never made any direct allegations against Tyler, though they have stated they find his behavior odd and his interest in Anita to be somewhat obsessive. When asked about their relationship, Anna stated that she wouldn't necessarily list Tyler as one of Anita's best friends. When interviewed by Crime Watch Daily, Tyler expressed he had a crush on Anita but was not in love with her. He also acknowledged that he knew Anita did not feel the same way about him. I do think it's relevant to note, though, that the question about loving Anita was asked in front of Tyler's wife, so take that for what you will. About a month after the murders, police began to expand their interviews. Residents at the apartment building were asked to come down to the station to discuss the case. Among those who was called down was Tyler, who in this instance began to get the impression that police might be looking at him with more suspicion. At that time, Tyler submitted a DNA sample. While in subsequent interviews he has stated that he was ruled out based on that test, police have never confirmed this. In fact, while we know many DNA samples were taken, no results have ever been shared. Soon, time began passing more rapidly, and there were no new developments. Given that investigators had both the murder weapon and the killer's DNA in addition to fingerprints, a lot of rumors began circulating about why the case hadn't advanced. Many of these rumors focused specifically on the DNA, which at least one reporter noted, according to a law enforcement source, that none of the DNA had been tested. This was dismissed by Chief Deputy Robert Barnard of the Ward County Sheriff's Department, who explained, quote, "We recovered DNA evidence at the crime scene in general, including the knife. Nearly everyone that we interviewed submitted to a DNA sample, and all of those samples have been compared to the DNA from that crime scene." End quote. Police further explained that they've never gotten a match to the DNA, but at the same time have also said they still believe it's possible they may have spoken to the killer during some part of the investigation. Despite efforts to raise awareness and to continue digging, the case began growing cold. Approximately 1 year after Anita's murder, a bizarre turn of events raised many eyebrows. While few details are available, it's been confirmed that the apartment building's maintenance worker, the man who had originally brought the cut screen to Gordon's attention, took his own life. For their part, investigators had originally stated that he had cooperated with their investigation, submitted a DNA sample, and he had been ruled out. However, the timing of his death and the reasons behind it, which one can only speculate about, helped fuel the fire of suspicion that he may have been involved. Unfortunately, if that was the case, no evidence has ever been discovered or disclosed which could make that connection. In July of 2008, a reward which had been issued for information regarding Anita's murder was increased to $20,500. Investigators have been very public about the fact that they believe someone knew more about the case and may have further details that they'd never come forward with. Around the same time, it was noted that police had sent out evidence to the state crime lab for additional testing. What results, if any, came from those tests has never been disclosed, but it wouldn't be the last time further testing was done. 2 months later, in September of 2008, the reward was increased again, this time reaching $25,000. Unfortunately, time continued passing with no new leads. In 2012, 5 years after Anita's murder, Sharon was asked about the case and how the family deals with the lack of answers. She explained to the Bismarck Tribune, quote, "It's the same thing day after day, year after year. It's very tough. We go to the cemetery a lot and keep wishing it's not what it is. We're still waiting. I feel absolutely helpless, but she is with me every day. It is never off my mind." End quote. In April of 2013, tragedy would once again strike the Knutson family. Anita's younger brother, Daniel, had changed so much since his sister's murder. Reportedly, her death hit him hard, and his family believes he never fully recovered. Sadly, the 22-year-old took his own life, noting directly that his sister's unsolved murder was a major piece of that decision. When asked about her brother's death, Anna told the Huffington Post, quote, "I definitely think he took his life because of her death. He really struggled with it. I mean, we all did, but he took it especially hard. He was never quite the same after her murder, and I think it really haunted him that he wasn't there to help her." End quote. For the Knutson family, they couldn't help but believe Anita's killer had now taken 2 of their children. It's been 13 years since Anita was killed in her apartment by an unknown assailant. Over all that time, the case has seemed to remain in a standstill. While investigators acknowledge it has grown cold, they've also said it's active and something they focus on. Minot Police Captain John Klug, when speaking with the Minot Daily News, acknowledged that both the Knutson's family frustration as well as that of the community was mixed with that of investigators who were all frustrated. But they were simply missing a key piece of information that could crack things open. Klug enforced the importance of tips, explaining, quote, "There are a number of things that could break this case. It might be somebody that hears a story or a friend that confides in them. The important part for us is keeping it out there, front and center. There's not any information that's out there that's not worth our time. Anybody with information, if they know anybody connected with Anita, that might help us." End quote. Klug noted that the state crime lab was approaching the evidence from new angles now, utilizing new technology, and it was hoped something new could be determined. For their part, Anita's family have never given up, and they do believe that justice will be served eventually. Billboards were erected along heavily traveled roads, and in 2019, digital billboards were utilized during the state fair, hoping to gain maximum exposure. Anna continues to be an advocate for her sister, being involved in interviews and expressing both sides of the struggle, the grief of Anita's murder and the frustration of a stalled-out investigation. She believes, though, that Anita likely knew her killer, which investigators tend to agree with. Curiously, despite previous mentions of suspects being ruled out, in at least one interview, investigators noted that they didn't feel anyone was ruled out. Anita Knutson was just 18 years old when she was murdered on Sunday, June 3, 2007, in her 4th Street apartment in northwest Minot, North Dakota. Over the course of the past 13 years, police have interviewed more than 40 people and gathered DNA samples from almost everyone they spoke with. Despite being in possession of the killer's DNA and possibly fingerprints, they have never had a confirmed match against anyone they have tested. For those who look into the case from the outside, they see a vibrant, intelligent, talented woman who had her life taken in a completely needless crime. For the most part, suspicions continue to bounce between the original cast of characters, the roommate with whom Anita fought, the guy who pursued her and she turned down, the maintenance man who later took his own life, construction workers in the area, and of course the possibility of someone who has never officially crossed the radar of investigators. While police feel frustration and confusion about the inability to solve the case, for the Knutson family, it is often more about the pain and loss of their beloved daughter and sister. When asked about the day she learned Anita had been killed, Sharon most painfully replied, quote, "That was real hard, because for the adoption, I had to go to the court and tell the judge I would take care of her and make sure she was safe her whole life, and I didn't manage to do that." One of the first things that comes clear when you look into this case is the way people talk about Anita. There are countless quotes mentioning the type of person she was, how kind she was, how nice she was, how she stood up for people and believed in doing what was right, how smart she was. Perhaps that makes this case all the more tragic. A good person working hard to achieve her goals, killed for no apparent reason by someone who has managed to elude identification and capture for more than 13 years. If she was alive today, Anita would be 31 years old, likely finished with school, well into her career, and who knows what she may have offered to the world. Sadly, we'll never know what Anita may have become, and so we're left to try and determine who would do something like this and why. And of course, there is the tragedy of her brother Daniel, who her family believes would be alive today had Anita not been killed. There's a lot of different theories in this case and several different angles. Before we move in that direction, I wanted to take a few minutes to address the confusion, primarily surrounding the DNA evidence. I have to admit, despite reading multiple statements from police, I don't exactly know what the state of the DNA evidence is. On the one hand, we're told they have the killer's DNA. They've taken DNA samples from people they've questioned, and they've compared those samples. One would think, via comparison, they'd be able to rule some people out. And while early on comments were made to that effect, that certain people had been ruled out, more recent statements suggest no one has been ruled out. While investigators have confirmed the DNA comparisons were conducted, they've never released the details of those tests other than to say they've never gotten a match. Now, you'd imagine if you compared someone's DNA to the killer's and you didn't have a match, you could probably rule them out, but that hasn't happened. Investigators have never confirmed how exactly they got the killer's DNA. Was it blood, saliva, semen, something else? They did note that Anita was not sexually assaulted, but there's been no discussion about the possibility that the killer could have still achieved sexual gratification in some way. Remember the Arliss Perry case? Her killer left semen behind at the scene. BTK left semen behind at a scene after he had committed murders. At the same time, the killer could have cut himself on the knife, as so often happens with stabbings, though in this case 2 stabs makes that seem a little less probable. Perhaps the way in which the DNA was obtained has something revealing to say about the scene, to say about the case, and maybe that's why we've never gotten confirmation. On the other hand, maybe the DNA police are in possession of is limited, not a complete sample, and therefore while testing can be conducted, it may not be exact enough to meet a standard for ruling someone in or out, but more so can give investigators a direction to look. We could endlessly speculate about it, but unless the police choose to give more information, we simply have no way of knowing. Because of that, I will likely not address DNA too much throughout the theories, as it doesn't appear to have been that helpful so far. When you examine the different possibilities in this case, you've got a handful which seem to be most prominently considered. Looking at this list, people tend to look suspiciously at Tyler, the roommate, the maintenance man, construction workers, and then of course, the potential of a yet unknown person. Many of the comments and theories I've seen around this case focus in on Tyler, somewhat understandably, and so that seems like the best point at which to begin theory analysis. Tyler is somewhat of an enigma in this case. All of his statements seem to imply that he felt and still does feel a very strong connection to Anita. Tyler has admitted that he had a crush on her. I don't think that was revelatory to anyone, including Anita herself, but he's also acknowledged that his feelings were not returned. While Anita talked with him, was friendly with him, attended senior prom with him, Tyler seems to have been aware that she wasn't interested in him romantically. Much of Tyler's behaviors have been depicted in one of two ways, either the actions of someone who cared very much for Anita, or perhaps those of someone who had an unhealthy obsession. Depending on context, that perspective can change. Tyler attended Minot State University and moved into an apartment with his brother in the same building as Anita. While some have referred to this as strange, noting that it's almost obsessive or stalkerish, others have acknowledged that Anita was the only person Tyler knew going into that school, and maybe he wanted to be close to her. Tyler himself has acknowledged that he was shy, that he didn't have a lot of friends, if any, outside of Anita. So it isn't difficult to imagine he may have wanted to be near her, to potentially get plugged into the social pipeline she would undoubtedly form. Surely you can look at it and see sinister intentions, as easily as you could see a kid who didn't want to be left behind and have to create his own way. Anita's family has had some interesting things to say about Tyler. Sharon described his behavior as strange. Gordon referred to his reaction to the murder as odd, while noting that he had been very persistent of Anita. Anna implied that while Tyler knew Anita and was friendly with her, she would not have included him amongst the names of Anita's best friends. The fact is, I've not found anything where Anita herself can be quoted about anything to do with Tyler, other than she didn't want to date him. Anita, being as kind as she was, being a proponent for the underdog, may have felt for Tyler and wanted to support him and help him in so much as getting to know people. We know he asked her out several times and she wasn't interested. That doesn't mean she didn't care, and it didn't mean she wanted to banish him from her life. With many of the details available about the type of person she was, is it really that hard to imagine she wouldn't have wanted to hurt his feelings, and therefore may not have been as direct or blunt as others may have been in a similar situation? Sure, but Tyler seemed to get the message anyway. A lot of what has made people view him as suspicious has come after the murder, but I do think it's important to note that while Anita complained to her mother that she was scared of and concerned about her roommate, there do not appear to be any instances in which she said the same about Tyler. Tyler created a Facebook page and tribute videos for Anita. He actively tries to work on the case, going so far as to send tips into the police when he learns new details or someone contacts him with information. It's a difficult thing to look at. Are you watching the overactive involvement of a potential murderer who wants to associate himself with the case, perhaps in an attempt to throw suspicion off himself? Or are you seeing a guy who clearly had strong feelings for Anita and who wants to do whatever he can to try and assist in solving this heinous crime? Everyone has a different answer. I suppose all we can do is examine the known facts, few as they may be, and see where it takes us. From the first moment of the investigation, we know Tyler was cooperative. He spoke with investigators that same night in a van, answering their questions. He was able to supply them with the last time he spoke to Anita, according to chat logs on his computer. After that first conversation, there didn't appear to be any suspicion directed at him. While Gordon did describe Tyler's behaviors as odd, noting that he didn't cry, others have acknowledged that everyone reacts differently, and shock can often numb one's emotional response or delay it. Surely that could have happened here. The next time Tyler was interviewed by police was a month later, when they were questioning others who lived in the building. It's been implied that the second conversation was a little more pointed, that investigators may have pushed Tyler a bit, but the end result is the same. Tyler isn't named as a person of interest. The investigation doesn't appear to turn to dig deeper into him. In fact, he voluntarily provides DNA to the police. While Tyler argues the DNA cleared him, police are much more vague, saying they have no matches, but they've also cleared no one. Looking at the murder itself, there's been a lot of back and forth arguments about Tyler's potential to be involved. He lived in the same building, and so were he to have committed this crime, he wouldn't have had to have gone far to get home and clean up. If the murder did take place in the early hours of Sunday or perhaps the late hours of Saturday, then he'd have had even more time to cover up. We know the window screen was cut after the murder. Some see this as trying to stage the scene to look like a break-in. Others have argued the killer may have been trying to escape via the window, though I've always had one question about that which doesn't make any sense. If you're cutting that screen with the murder weapon urgently to escape, why do you then turn around and walk back into the apartment, leaving the knife in the sink? It just doesn't make any sense. So, this could have been done to stage it to eliminate someone being linked to Anita. We know the apartment door was locked, though there's no way of knowing if the door was locked by the killer as they left. The implication being that Anita could have potentially allowed her killer inside the apartment, there being no need for forced entry. Some have argued Tyler could have dropped by, perhaps knowing that Anita's roommate wasn't there that weekend. There's been a lot of theorizing that Tyler could have propositioned Anita again and been turned down again, and that everything after just happened. The absence of a struggle, the lack of defensive wounds could imply that Anita knew her killer and was taken by surprise. When you look at the weapon used, when you see only 2 stab wounds made, when you see that Anita was face down on her bed and then covered up, it isn't hard to presume you may be looking for someone who felt guilt and shame for what they had done. Surely, that could point towards someone she knew, but it doesn't absolutely have to. One question I've always had about the scene was the fact that Anita was stabbed in the chest, but was found face down. Was she stabbed while standing and fell on the bed that way? Or was she stabbed while lying in the bed and then rolled over by her killer, as if to avoid her gaze? Unfortunately, those details are unknown. We all know that stabbings are generally considered personal crimes, but we also have to acknowledge that plenty of people have been stabbed who didn't know their attackers. Stabbing is often considered subconsciously sexual, the phallic blade, the body penetration. While Anita was not sexually assaulted, this doesn't mean the crime couldn't have been sexually motivated, nor does it rule out the possibility that the killer could have achieved some kind of sexual gratification from it. I suppose for me, the issue comes up with the stabbing itself. I've seen a lot of people refer to this murder as a rage killing, overkill, but the evidence doesn't seem to support that. 2 stabs, one of which was lethal, with a small knife. It seems more reactionary or hesitant. Is it possible the killer didn't go to the apartment with the intention of committing murder, but that's how things ended up? The killer panics, cuts the screen, starts washing the knife, and then either hears someone or sees something and they decide to get out of there. A lot of people have considered that Tyler could have been responsible and may have been driven either due to another rejection, jealousy, or some yet undetermined motive. The problem comes in when you look at the evidence. If indeed police possess both DNA and fingerprints, you'd imagine if anything had matched Tyler, he would have been charged or questioned further. All records indicate he was never compelled to speak to police a third time. He wasn't visited again. And while he continues delivering potential tips to police, there doesn't seem to be a time where they decided to apply pressure and see how he responded. I think no matter what way you approach it, Tyler had to be examined as a potential person of interest. His relationship with Anita, his proximity to her apartment, his behaviors both before and after warrant a look. I am sure to this day, Tyler probably deals with some level of harassment from people who believe he's guilty, and I imagine that's difficult to live with. The fact is, while there's a lot of people suspicious, there isn't anything to make those suspicions concrete. As someone who desperately wants to see the case solved, I'm sure he struggles with the reality that, in order to do so, all angles must be examined, including the angle that points towards him. However, at the end of the day, it becomes a question of evidence, and as things stand today, there isn't any solid evidence to paint Tyler guilty. There's a lot of speculation, but speculation isn't enough to charge someone, and ultimately you have to make a choice. Would Tyler have killed Anita, or is he so attached to this case because he was so torn up by her murder? Moving away from Tyler and into Anita's apartment, the next theory to examine would involve her roommate. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information about her. We don't even know her name. What we do know, though, is that there was a tense and volatile relationship in that apartment. According to Anita's parents, she had frequent blow-ups with her roommate, at least one of which turned somewhat physical. Reportedly, some of these arguments revolved around the roommate bringing men home and then leaving them in the apartment as she herself went elsewhere, which made Anita feel unsafe in her own home. According to Sharon, Anita had received threatening texts from her roommate, which she believed made Anita fearful of her life. According to several of Anita's friends and her father Gordon, though, in the weeks leading up to the murder, things had begun to settle down. Apparently, Anita and her roommate were able to find some common ground and make amends, seemingly ending the difficult living situation. As we move into the murder itself, the roommate alleges that she was not present in the apartment that weekend, having instead been staying with her parents on the other side of town. We know police interviewed the roommate, we know they checked her alibi, which her parents confirmed, and we know she submitted a DNA sample. A lot of people feel the alibi isn't strong, as most people would expect someone's parents to be willing to cover for them. Considering the fact that the roommate's mother apparently showed up at Anita's funeral and got into a verbal altercation with Sharon, specifically about the fact that her daughter was questioned, raises a lot of eyebrows. It's a very strange situation and highly inappropriate, but does that necessarily mean the roommate was involved? No. I think given the living situation and the prior issues, it makes sense to look in this direction, but again, it's kind of like Tyler. Strange behaviors, suspicious acts, but nothing solid, nothing concrete. Again, DNA is involved and no matches have been made, so you've got to wonder, why is no one ruled out, including Anita's roommate? Generally, people theorize about this possibility in different ways. Some people think the roommate could have been the killer. Others think the roommate could have been away that weekend because she knew something was happening. There is, of course, the possibility that the roommate could have told people she was going away that weekend, not knowing that gave someone the green light they'd been waiting for to launch an attack. A part of me feels, though, if the roommate were the killer, the murder would have been more rage-based. If they truly fought the way it's been described, then 2 stabs with a small knife seems unlike what one would imagine, especially having brought the knife into the home. I feel like there were knives in that kitchen, which would have been easier to use than this so-called pocket knife. At the same time, if you believe the screen was cut to set the stage to look like a break-in, then maybe bringing in an outside weapon makes sense, and possibly leaving that weapon at the scene makes even more sense. A way of saying, well, it had to be somebody from outside, they broke in and left their knife behind. All signs seem to indicate that Anita was taken by surprise, either due to not being aware someone was in the apartment or knowing someone was but believing it was somebody she didn't have to worry about. If she had made up with her roommate, maybe she wouldn't have been worried about anything. We do have to keep in mind that, obviously, the roommate had a key, so access to the apartment wouldn't have been a challenge. Hell, the roommate could have gone away that weekend and entered the apartment secretly, waiting to strike. But then again, maybe she was at her parents' the whole time and was never involved. A lot of people have argued that the killer may have been a woman, which makes them take a much closer look at the roommate. The idea that it was a woman seems to be wrought entirely out of the fact that Anita wasn't beaten or sexually assaulted, but you could also be looking at a man who didn't want to kill her or didn't want to hurt her and things got out of control. Then again, I struggle to accept that 2 stabs is being completely out of control. They would have happened very fast, so it's anybody's guess. As far as the roommate goes, I completely understand suspicions there. I do think it's an angle that needs to be explored to the fullest. Where the case currently stands, though, there doesn't appear to be much police have to argue against her alibi or to physically put her in that apartment that Sunday morning or Saturday night. Sticking at the building itself, the next person who has garnered a lot of suspicion would be the maintenance man. What we know about this man, much like the roommate, is fairly limited, and probably even more so than the roommate. We know that he worked as the maintenance man/janitor, and as such was around the building a lot, was involved in a relationship with the building manager, knew the ins and outs, and had access to keys which would grant him entry to all apartments. He was the one who originally discovered the cut screen and brought it to Gordon's attention. According to police, he was cooperative with the investigation and gave them a DNA sample. While in recent times they have said no one had been cleared, at that time there were public comments made that they felt they'd ruled the maintenance man out. Approximately a year later, we know the maintenance man took his own life, and so for many people that was considered extremely suspicious, and reasonably so. However, we really don't have anything additional to examine, so all we can really say is that the maintenance man had access to the apartment, would have been familiar with its layout, likely had seen both Anita and her roommate previously, and on the morning Gordon came to the building, he had found the cut and knocked out screen. It seems a little strange that he would have found the screen and not followed up to check and ensure that residents were secure, but we also don't know if he found the screen 5 hours before Gordon arrived or 5 minutes. A lot of what people have been suspicious about was that he rushed up to Gordon about it, but if he had walked over and heard Gordon requesting entry to the apartment saying he was worried about his daughter, it doesn't surprise me that the maintenance man might be like, "Oh hey, I found something weird today." Wouldn't you volunteer that information if you had it? I think sometimes we make things overly complicated. It isn't difficult to see the screen as either a maintenance man doing his job and pointing out a discrepancy, or a potential person of interest trying to push the break-in theory by acknowledging the screen and bringing it to people's attention. The problem comes when you don't have any further evidence to make a connection. If the man cooperated and handed over DNA, he either felt secure he wasn't involved, or he thought the police didn't have the ability to actually link him to the crime. In a lot of cases where someone's close to a crime and later take their own life, we're compelled to believe they must have been involved. Maybe the guilt ate them alive, or the pressure of feeling under suspicion. The problem here seems to be that there doesn't appear to have been a time where this guy was under major suspicion or where pressure was applied. We don't know his history, we don't know his mental health situation, and we don't know the unfortunate series of events which led to his death. Apparently, no note was left behind making reference to Anita, either to claim guilt or innocence. Around the time he died, the case was already cold. Police didn't seem to have anything to nail any one person. You'd imagine if he were that fearful of being caught, so much so that it would be the sole impetus for him to take his life, it may have occurred closer to the actual crime. But then again, you don't know how something like this can weigh on someone's mind. Weighing all the evidence as it stands, the maintenance man is again like Tyler and the roommate. Arguments can be made both ways. Motives could be developed, be it obsession, anger, desire, or control. Access is there, be it from a kid living down the hall, a maintenance man with a key, or an angry roommate. Much like so much of this case, there's potential, but whatever evidence might be necessary to confirm something simply hasn't been found or doesn't exist. If the maintenance man's DNA was compared and it's been confirmed there's no matches yet, does that speak more towards his innocence or the quality of the DNA? It's remarkably frustrating, but we simply don't know. It's entirely understandable that people would look at the way his life ended and attribute it to a guilty conscience. But it's also worth noting that in most cases, no one really ever knows why someone took their own life outside of that person, and if they don't tell you, it's all guesswork. A part of me would like to believe if he had been the killer, he'd have admitted it in a note or to someone before taking his own life. But the realist in me acknowledges that some killers don't ever admit guilt, nor do they feel compelled to alleviate others of the pain that they have caused. Once we move beyond the people who have known connections to Anita, we begin to expand further out. Evidence and statements by police explain that construction projects were occurring both across the street and at the apartment itself. Apparently, across the street, an out-of-state construction business was doing work. At the apartment, a local man was employing day laborers for roofing work. Because of their proximity to the scene, obviously police were interested in speaking with them. While few details have been released, the story seems to be that the workers across the street were questioned, and it's theorized they spoke to everyone who had been there. They were on the books and working for the company so names could be tracked. At the apartment, though, the work was done primarily by a rotating group of day laborers, some who worked the entire project, some who worked a few days, and some who came and went. Because of this, the lack of a paper trail to adequately identify everyone involved, police can't confirm that they spoke to everyone. The sheer fact of the matter is, it's entirely possible this crime could have been committed by someone who had been working for either construction group, who happened to see Anita coming and going, or saw the roommate coming and going. Maybe they saw an option. Maybe Anita, being as nice as she was, spoke to them from time to time, or waved, or anything really that someone could have interpreted as an opportunity. I've known a lot of carpenters and construction workers in my life. One commonality that they all shared was that they carried pocket knives. Some a legit Swiss Army style, others the folding blade type. We know the knife that was used in the murder had blood and dirt on it, so it seems clear that the murder weapon wasn't kept in a drawer somewhere safe, but was actively used. Sadly, we don't have a lot to work with on this theory, but I do believe there's enough for us to say you can't rule any of the construction workers completely out. We know some of the men police spoke to gave their DNA, and by omission that implies some of them didn't. Now, not giving your DNA doesn't necessarily make you guilty, but I'd like to imagine police at least took the time to look closer at the individuals who didn't. That being said, we can't know everyone who was there at any given moment. We can't know if someone could have been working the job, decided they were going to go into that apartment, and ultimately stop showing up for days or weeks before planning to execute the crime. We can't even know if they continued showing up for work like nothing had happened so as to avoid arousing suspicion. If Anita truly was killed early Sunday morning or perhaps very late Saturday night, most construction projects don't work on Sundays. That would give them time to clean up. Not to mention, working in construction, it wouldn't be completely out of character for someone to have cuts or bruises, especially to their hands. I suppose the question becomes motive, although in this case, that question's never been fully answered. The possibilities are pretty wide. But you could be looking at someone who found Anita attractive and wanted to sexually assault her, but she resisted, and so she was killed. I do think robbery is a possibility as well. Someone looking to grab some stuff and is either caught off guard by Anita being home or by her walking in on them, and so they react with murder. While murder itself could be purely the motive, I just struggle to accept that someone who wanted to kill anyone would have done so with a small pocket knife and 2 stabs, but stranger things have happened. So the idea that this had to be someone close to Anita doesn't necessarily mean it had to be someone that she knew. Maybe it just had to be someone who was in close proximity and around enough to learn her habits, travel times, and behaviors. A construction worker at her building or across the street surely could have done that. Finally, we have one last angle which needs to be looked at, and that's the most difficult angle of all. That this crime could have been committed by someone whose name has never been mentioned, who police themselves may never have suspected or looked into. Maybe even someone they did speak to at some point who provided an alibi or something which made them believe they couldn't have been involved. This is my least favorite theory to analyze, but it's essentially the random attack / unknown assailant angle. When we look at this theory, we have to kind of group different types together, and to do that, we have to have more of an understanding of the people around Anita, both who knew her and who didn't. You've got anyone at Minot State University up to and including students, teachers, faculty, security, and etc. You've got anyone living in the building or neighborhood. You've got guys Anita's roommate had brought home, people Anita met at clubs. This covers all genders, as it's not out of the question that Anita could have been killed by anyone. I wish the killer's DNA would have been tested at a minimum to confirm gender, but if that has been done, it's never been revealed. We also have the runner who was spotted in the neighborhood, who police ruled out, but you never know. It's interesting to note that Anita's apartment was 1.1 miles northwest of Minot International Airport. There are 4 lodging locations, hotels and motels, within 1.5 miles, including one which was only a tenth of a mile away. That opens the door to a lot of people who could have been passing through, people who could have committed this crime and then gone on their way. By the time police start looking around, that person could have flown out or driven away. Or maybe you could be looking at someone living a more transient lifestyle, someone who might tend to keep a pocket knife on them for protection. While it's always been presumed this crime was likely committed by someone who knew Anita, it's entirely possible it was either done by someone who had simply seen her or someone who was looking to kill someone and it didn't matter who it was. I think we also have to consider the possibility of someone posing as someone else. Someone acting as an electrician, telephone repairman, city worker, police officer, or even someone claiming their car broke down and they needed to use a phone. If indeed Anita let her killer into the apartment, she doesn't seem the type who would turn down someone who was desperate for help, or at least feigning to be. When you look at it this way, you've got a lot of different possibilities. Granted, there seems to be more suspicion cast on people in Anita's life, but I don't think this can be completely ruled out, especially when you've got police saying none of the DNA tests they've done have ever matched. If you don't have something else that's keeping you looking close to home, then you've got to expand. The unfortunate truth is, trying to find this person could be incredibly difficult if it really was a random crime. Much of this case seems to revolve around the basics: motive, means, and opportunity. Some of the known people spoken to have 1, 2, or all 3. With some of them, it's a little less clear. When you begin expanding outward to construction workers, travelers, people from campus, people from clubs, and transients, you begin to find potential suspects who might not have motives which are so clear, or intentions which are definable. There's a part of me that agrees that the killer likely knew Anita, that Anita was specifically targeted. I can believe what I do all day, but I can only apply what I can prove, and honesty with as little information as has ever been revealed, we can't prove much. For 13 years, Anita's killer has been out there, free to walk the streets, free to live a life they deprived her of. Free to spend time with their family, while robbing another family of not only their daughter, but a son who took his own life, spiraling into grief and pain over the loss of his beloved sister. While we know very little, and police remain extremely tight-lipped, there is of course the one truth which cannot be denied. Someone knows exactly what happened to Anita that first weekend of June in 2007. Have they told someone? Have they committed another similar crime? Have they moved away, starting a life somewhere else? Or is it possible they've merely blended into the community of Minot? For all these years, Anita's family has been hungry for answers, desperate to see justice delivered and to have the ability to look the killer in their eyes as they are charged, sentenced, and left to rot behind bars. There's no doubt someone out there possesses information which could alleviate their anger, help give closure to their plight, and result in seeing a killer taken off the streets. As the Minot Police Department have been so emphatic in saying, it's a tip from someone that could ultimately break this case open. Even the most minute detail which may seem unimportant could illuminate all the chaos and confusion. If only someone would pick up the phone, send a letter, type an email. Unfortunately, until someone does, police discover new evidence or make a confirmed DNA match, the murder of Anita Knutson will remain open, unsolved, and growing cold. On Wednesday, March 16th, the Minot police announced they've arrested Anita's former roommate, 34-year-old Nicole Rice, previously known as Nicole Thomas. Working as a civilian employee at Minot Air Force Base, she was arrested without incident and charged with felony intentional homicide. I'll now play a clip of this press conference led by Police Chief John Klug, courtesy of the City of Minot YouTube channel.
At about 3:25 p.m., 34-year-old Nicole Rice was arrested for murder and taken to Ward County Jail. Although most of the detectives who worked the original scene and investigation have retired, we have not forgotten about this case. Detective Carmen Asham and McKaylee Talbot were assigned to take over as the lead investigators. I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time, I'm glad to say that we have a person responsible for the murder of Anita Knutson in custody.
According to multiple news outlets, Rice is charged with a Class AA felony and if convicted faces a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rice was being held in Ward County Jail until last night when, according to court documents, her father, Kevin Thomas, bailed her out, writing a check for $120,000. Asked about Rice and rumors that she had been ruled out as a suspect previously in the investigation, Chief John Klug replied with the following.
I don't know that I would say that she was ever cleared. There was never enough to arrest her, but I would say that she was always a person of interest in this case.
According to recently released court documents, William May, an ex-boyfriend of Rice's, reported to police that sometime between 2008 and 2009, Rice had drank to excess and became belligerent. During a rant, she allegedly told him that she had in fact murdered Anita. At the time of the murder, Rice had an alibi saying she was home visiting her parents. However, court documents go on to show statements from her and family members being listed as inconsistent. One witness reportedly told police that Rice was at a bar in Russo, North Dakota, approximately 40 miles south of Minot, the weekend of the murder. This witness claimed that Rice left the bar, saying she was going to pick up clothes from her apartment. Rice, who was 19 at the time of the murder, has a daughter and got married just a few months ago in December of 2021. As of this time, there hasn't been a statement issued by Rice, her family, or her attorney. During this time, the Knutson family needs space to come to terms with this reality and to grieve. Reached for comment, Anita's mother Sharon told the forum, quote, "It's good in one way, but it's making everything come back again." End quote. As of now, this is the latest information available. I will, as always, keep a close eye on developments, and a longer, full update episode will be released in the future. I hope, despite the horrors of this case, perhaps soon Anita's family can finally find some sense of peace in knowing that her murderer is no longer free to walk the streets and is facing a long stretch behind bars. If you're looking for more information about the murder of Anita Knutson, the podcast Jensen and Holes touched on this case. Crime Watch Daily has several videos involving interviews with her family. The Bismarck Tribune has done incredible investigative work, and there is a Facebook group entitled In Loving Memory of Anita Knutson. If you have any information about the murder of Anita Knutson, please contact the Minot Police Department at 701-852-0111. A reward for information remains in place. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at traceevpod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, message me on Instagram at traceevidencepod, or comment in the Facebook group.